important things in your life. And we're talking about margins. You're probably thinking about your schedule and those kinds of things. That's actually something for me. I don't really have time necessarily struggling with filling up things in my calendar. I'm actually pretty comfortable with having some margin in my schedule. But I have discovered something that's about myself that can be probably a little more subtle. When I know there's something that I need to do, right, I just want to get started, right? There's a task in front of me. I don't necessarily want to sit around. I don't want to think about it. I want to dive in. And, sometimes that is a good thing, and there's nothing wrong with being productive. There's nothing wrong with just wanting to get things done. But I've noticed that sometimes that instinct can get in the way of something very important, something more important. So, for example, if I'm working on a sermon or if I'm working on the Wednesday night Bible study, my first reaction is to get up in the morning, grab my coffee, sit down, start working, right? Open my Bible, my notes, my commentary, and just start thinking through the passage. Start writing. Just go, go, go. And then sometimes I have to stop and remember, it's like, maybe I should pray first, right? That's important because there's a subtle danger in doing something for God without first taking time to be with God. And I think most of us understand this tension that we have, right? There are things that we need to get done. There are emails that need to be answered. If you're like me, it's probably like 10,000 unread emails on your little circle on your iPhone. Right, but you have errands that you need to run. There's people that just need our attention. There are responsibilities at work. There are responsibilities at home. And some things really are urgent. And the problem is that urgent things, they have a way of demanding our attention whether they're actually important or not. And sometimes those urgent things, they win simply because they are right in front of us. And we'll think, you know what, I'll pray after this, right? I'll start reading my Bible after I get through this busy season of life. Or I'll slow down after things settle down. But here's the problem. There will always be something else. Always be something else. There's always going to be another project. There's always going to be another appointment. Always going to be another notification that pops up on your phone. And there will always be another load of laundry. Right? And then we start having to ask ourselves questions like this. Right? I'm not sure if I should do more laundry or just buy more underwear. And if we're not careful, right? If we're not careful, we can spend our entire lives responding to whatever is screaming the loudest for our attention. And meanwhile, the things that matter, most often they don't scream. Right? I think we can move to the next slide. I'm distracted by that, so. But really, though, the things that matter most often, they don't scream, right? Your marriage doesn't always tell you that it needs your attention right now. Your kids, they may not always come to you and say, Dad, Mom, I need some time with you. Especially, and I'm being serious, especially when they're teenagers. They might not come and tell you that. And your relationship with God doesn't usually send you a notification. The things that matter most often require us to make room for them intentionally. We have to be intentional about it. And that's why I think this idea of margins is so important. Because the margins, they don't just happen. If we don't intentionally create space for what matters most, the urgent things will eventually fill that space for us. And here's where this gets really interesting. We usually don't have a problem deciding between good things and bad things. Now, sometimes we do, but usually it's not between good things and bad things. It's this. We have a problem deciding between good things and better things. Because many times the thing keeping us from what matters most isn't sin. It's a good thing that we've allowed to become the most important thing. And that's exactly what makes the story we're about to read so interesting. Because Martha wasn't choosing between something good and something bad. She was choosing between something good and something better. And I think that's why this story hits a little closer to home than we might expect. So if you'll turn to your Bibles, we'll be in Luke chapter 10. Luke chapter 10, starting in verse 38. And before we read this story, let me give you a little bit of background here. So the two women that we will read about, Martha and Mary, they are sisters. We see them several times in the Gospels. And they seem to have had a close relationship with Jesus. So Luke tells us that Jesus is traveling towards Jerusalem, and along the way he comes to a village where Martha welcomes him into her home. So let's look at what happens. Luke 10:38. While they were traveling, he, Jesus, entered a village, and a woman named Martha welcomed him into her home. She had a sister named Mary, who also sat at the Lord's feet and was listening to what he said. But Martha was distracted by her many tasks. And she came up and asked, "Lord, don't you care that my sister has left me to serve alone? So tell her to give me a hand." The Lord answered her, "Martha, Martha, you are worried and upset about many things, but one thing is necessary. Mary has made the right choice, and it will not be taken away from her." So first, let's notice what Mary is doing here. Luke says that Mary, she sat at the Lord's feet and was listening to what he said. And I think that phrase, sat at the Lord's feet, is important. To sit at the feet of a teacher is a posture of disciple. She was there to listen, right? She was there to listen and to learn. So she wasn't wasting time. She wasn't being lazy. She wasn't avoiding responsibility. She was doing exactly what a disciple does. She was learning from Jesus. And then there's Martha. And how does Martha respond? Martha, she responds by serving. She wants to serve. And listen, Jesus doesn't criticize Martha for this. And that's important because it's easy to read this story and then think that like Martha is the bad sister and then Mary, she's the good sister. But that's not what's happening here. Martha welcomed Jesus into her home. And her desire was to take care of take care of Jesus. It wasn't wrong. But remember what verse 40 says. Martha was distracted by her many tasks. Martha was distracted. And I think that word distracted is important. It's important to notice because even though Martha is doing something good, somewhere along the way, the good thing she's doing has begun to distract her from the most important thing. And so eventually her distraction, it turns into frustration. She gets frustrated. And she comes to Jesus and essentially says, "Lord, don't you care that my sister has left me to serve alone? You tell her to help me." Right? Notice what has happened here. Martha began by welcoming Jesus into her home, and now she is questioning him. She was doing something for Jesus, and somehow she became frustrated with him. And Jesus, his response is very tender here, right? He says, "Martha, Martha, you are worried and upset about many things, but one thing is necessary." Many things and one thing. That's that contrast. That is the contrast. Jesus isn't telling Martha that nothing needs to be done. He's not saying that serving is bad. He's not saying that work is bad. He's not saying that an active life is somehow less spiritual than a quiet life. The issue here is priority. It's priority. Martha had allowed the many things to distract her from the one thing. And Jesus says that Mary has made the right choice, and it will not be taken away from her. You see, Mary had decided that in that moment, being with Jesus mattered more than everything else that she could have been doing. And here's something else about Mary. There's something beautiful about Mary's posture towards Jesus. In the 3 gospel scenes where we see Mary responding directly to Jesus, she keeps finding her way back to his feet. And here she's listening at his feet. In John chapter 11, when her brother Lazarus dies, she falls at the feet of Jesus. In John 12, she anoints Jesus' feet with expensive perfume. So she's listening, she's surrendering, and she's worshiping. And there's something about Mary's posture toward Jesus that whatever she is going through, whether it's learning or if she's grieving or just worshiping, she keeps making her way back to the feet of Jesus. And maybe that's part of what Jesus is teaching Martha and to us. You're right, because Martha, you see, she was doing something good. But in that moment, she had become so distracted by whatever needed to be done that she was missing what mattered most. You see, the goal isn't simply to have a less busy life. The goal isn't simply to get more things done, even if it's for Jesus or his church. This is the goal. The goal is to recognize what matters most and give it the place it deserves. The goal is to recognize what matters most and give it the place it deserves. Right? Because there's always going to be many things. But Jesus says there's one thing that is necessary, and that is to make room to be with him. And I think this is where we have to be careful, because if we are not careful, we can hear this story, right? We can hear this story and we can turn it into a productivity lesson, right? Don't be like Martha. Right? Slow down, make more time, sit quietly, get your priorities straight. And that is all well and good. But that's not really the point. You see, Jesus isn't inviting Martha, and he's not inviting us into a better system for managing our lives. Jesus is really inviting us into a relationship with him. And Jesus teaches the same kind of principle in another place in John 15, verses 4 and 5. He says this, "Remain in me, and I in you. Just as a branch is unable to produce fruit by itself unless it remains on the vine, neither can you unless you remain in me. I am the vine, you are the branches. The one who remains in me and I in him produces much fruit, because you can do nothing without me." You see, Jesus doesn't say, "Work harder for me." What does Jesus say? He says, "Remain in me." Because the fruit, it comes from the relationship. And I think that's part of what we're seeing in the story of Mary and Martha. He's reminding us that being with him, being with Jesus should be our first priority. Because what we do for Jesus is supposed to flow out of our relationship with Jesus, right? Be with Jesus. And then you do for Jesus. That's the order. And that's why this story isn't really about becoming less busy. Right? It's about recognizing that Jesus himself, he is truly worth stopping for. And that's something, be honest with you, that's something that I need to remember. Like I was saying before, when I sit down to prepare something, the temptation is to think, right, I need to get something done for God. That God isn't primarily interested in how much I can accomplish for Him. Right? He wants me. And He wants you. He wants our attention. And He wants our trust. And He wants our heart. And He really wants us to listen to Him. And then from that relationship, out of that relationship, then we can go and we can serve. Charles Erdman, a professor of theology at Princeton Theological Seminary, he makes this point beautifully. He says, while the Master does appreciate all that we undertake for Him, He knows that our first need is to sit at His feet and learn His will. Then in our tasks, we shall be calm and peaceful and kindly. In other words, being with Jesus changes how we do things for Jesus. Being with Jesus changes how we do things for Him. And that's why we're to be with Jesus and then do for Him. And ultimately, that's what the gospel gives us. We don't have to earn Jesus' attention. We don't have to prove ourselves through our service. We don't have to accomplish enough to make ourselves valuable to Him. Jesus has already given Himself for us. So we can stop and listen. And we can receive. And we can just sit at His feet. Sit at His feet. And then we can get up and we can serve. And it's not because we're trying to earn His love, but because we've already received His love. And so that's the difference, right? That's the difference between working for Jesus and serving Jesus out of a relationship with Him. So maybe that is the first margin that we need to create, right? It's not just more space in our schedule, but space to be with the one who matters most. So what do? If Jesus is telling us that the one thing is necessary, and if that moment Mary made the right choice, then maybe the question for us isn't simply, how busy am I? Maybe the question is this. Maybe it is, what am I making room for? Right? What am I making room for? Because we all have limited attention. Right? All of us do. We definitely all have limited time. And every time we say yes to something, what are we doing? We're saying no to something else. So I want to give you a very simple challenge this week. Make room to be with Jesus. Make room to be with Jesus before you start doing for Jesus. And for some of you, that might mean changing the way you start your day. Right? Before you check your phone, before you start working on something, before you start tackling the list of things that need to get done, you might just need to stop and open God's Word and pray. And most importantly, listen. Have time to listen to what God is telling you. Right? You just sit at the feet of Jesus. And I know the struggle is real. I really do. I have to plan out my week and my days. I have a screenshot real quick of Notes app on my phone. And this is what I do at the beginning of the week. And then I add more details. As you see, one of them is plan out my day. But I have to do this. I have to do this to keep myself in check. And I have to put things down on paper, in this case my phone, because I know myself well enough to know that if I don't plan things out, man, things can get off the rails really quickly. I can just squirrel, right? So fast. So I plan out my week, try to plan out my days. I put things on the list that I know need to do, but especially that first hour and a half. That is so important, right? The daily reading and the time for prayer, my prayer journal. I'm one of those people that I use a prayer journal because I know I've got to focus. If I'm writing it, I'm at least able to focus. And the one thing that's on there is the MMBC directory. One thing I have started doing, this is just recently, this is a great place to start praying for your church family. If you have one of these, you just start going through the list. And there's a lot of people in here I still don't know. It's people I haven't seen, but God can lay things on your heart. And so just use this. If you're struggling, well, I don't know who to pray for. I don't know how to pray. Just start going down the list and start praying for your church family. It will make a difference. But there, let me point out one more thing on this. I did have walk on there, and I can tell you right now, I did not walk that day. Or any other day this week. Right? Nope, I did not. What was that? Yeah, right. Well, I don't mind the heat too much, but yeah. But we do have the gym. We could go over there and walk around. But apparently even the things that we put on our list, right, they don't always happen. But I know that's why I need my list. And it's not because I have everything figured out, because I promise, I am sorry, your pastor does not have everything figured out. Right? But it's because I know I don't. I know I don't. And I think that's something that we all have to wrestle with in some form or fashion. Right? Because if we don't intentionally make room for what matters most, the things that are right in front of us, the things right there, they're usually going to win. So maybe you need to create a little space before the demands of the day. Right? Maybe it's 10 minutes. Maybe it's 20 minutes, right? Maybe it's sitting in your car before you walk into work. If you have a commute and you try to get there a little, just sit down and have a little time with God. All right? Turn off the television. Maybe it's putting your phone in another room for just a few minutes, pretending it's not there. That's the one thing about these. These things are great. But they are a huge distraction, and they are for me too. I can just get on there. I love watching funny things on Instagram. I can just sit there and scroll, and then I send it to Courtney, who's laying right next to me, and we just, right? But they're great, but they can be, sometimes it's just, I'm going to put this in a room that I'm not in, just so I'm not tempted to pick it up. But the thing is, the amount of time isn't really the point here. It's our posture. Our posture, that's the point. It's whether we are willing to say, Jesus, before I get busy with everything else, I just want to be with you. I just want to spend time with you. So here's another question I'd encourage you to ask yourself this week. What good thing has become so important that it's crowding out the main thing? What good thing has become so important that it's crowding out the main thing? The one thing. Right? Just sit with that question for a moment. What good thing has taken up so much room in your life that there's no longer room for Jesus? And again, right, it may not be something bad. And that's what can make this so difficult sometimes, right? Sometimes a good thing can take up so much room that it leaves no room for what matters most. So maybe the prayer for this week isn't, God, could you please help me get more done? Maybe the prayer is this, God, show me what needs to move so I can make room for you. Because listen, Jesus isn't asking us to do nothing. That's not what he's doing. He's asking us to recognize what comes first. Because many things will always need our attention. But there's one thing that is necessary. So this week, let's choose the good part. And let's make room for Jesus. Because here's what I think we're going to discover over these next few weeks as we're going through this idea of margins, right? Making room isn't about having less in our lives. It's about having room for the right things. And that means we're probably going to have to make some choices. We're going to have to make some choices about some things, right? Some things might have to shift around. Some things might have to get a little smaller. Right? Some things might need to wait. Some things just might need to get rid of it. Because if we try to give equal space and equal priority to everything in our lives, then we haven't actually prioritized anything. If we try to give equal space and equal priority to everything in our lives, we haven't actually prioritized anything. Because then everything becomes important. And that means that nothing is important. So as we begin this series, I want us to carry one question with us. What really matters? And have I made room for it? Right? Because there's always going to be something else to do. There's always going to be another task. And again, always more laundry. But Jesus reminds us that there is just one thing that is necessary. And that is to spend time with Him. To develop that relationship with Him. So let's be a people who make the right choice. And let's make room for Jesus. Make room for Him.